Journey Across Jean's Saga, Book 1, Now, Then, to Come, Part 2, Then, Chapter 1, The Bunker. There, Takver pronounces the word as it appears on the page. Makk follows along with their right pointer finger. There as a wall, Makk continues. That's it. Just practice the sounds we've been studying. You already have most of these words in your repertoire. Just let the sounds trigger the words that you already know. I'll read and you follow along. Takver takes the book from Makk and places it gently on her lap. Both are sitting on a moss-covered log outside of the bunker. The weather is pleasant enough to be outside with just a long-sleeve frock, although it's cool enough that Makk feels their nipples get a bit unyielding and decides to go inside and fetch their cloak. I'll be right back. Makk slides off the half-rotted log. It's a bit damp from the midnight rain. It's nice to be outside, just sitting for a change, before retiring for the day. And since the brunt of the scorching hours will soon be upon them, they only have less than an hour before they have to be inside. It's been almost an entire hold cycle since that horrible night that Makk lost everyone. Well, almost everyone. They still has Takver. Makk comes back outside, snuggled by their warm cloak. They reaches out their hand up toward their sibling. Give me a hand, will ya, Tak? Takver marks her current page with a dry, brown leaf and closes the book, reaching her hand out to her sibling. Once Makk is sitting back in their original spot, they pulls out some dried berries wrapped in a piece of nettle cloth from a pocket of their cloak. Here, have some dinner. They hands the berries to Tak. Then, nervously, I think it's time we go looking for them again. She puts the little package of berries on top of the book on her lap, looks over to Makk, and grabs their hands and holds them in hers. Okay. When should we leave? Takver knows all too well the desperation that Makk is feeling. She too lost her family to some scorching marauders and spent months looking for any traces of them. Alas, after 20 or 30 failed attempts, she gave up and accepted that she might never find them. Makk wasn't at that point yet. It was still too fresh. Well, first I think we need to finish planting the rest of the seedlings and sow the new seeds now that the threat of frost seems to be behind us. Then we can venture out. A few days earlier, on their way back from searching for Makk's stolen people for the fourth time, they spotted an area perfect for a garden. It's not too close to the bunker. They don't want to call attention to themselves by having a garden plot too nearby. And it gets plenty of sun, but not too much. Plus, the river is only a few minutes away. It'll be a lot of work to haul water, but it'll be worth it if they can grow some food to store. Of course, once they plant it, they'll have to watch out for marauders who might lie in wait, watching to see who is tending the garden. They'll have to be clever. In one of their trips back to the ruins of Makk's former encampment, Makk managed to salvage some of the seedlings that they'd planted back before the water fetchers set off on their journey. It brought Makk comfort knowing they still had a little piece of their old life. Any comfort is welcome at this point. It sounds like we have a plan then, Takver shares, patting Makk on the left leg. She is so patient and doesn't let Makk feel her feeling of hopelessness. After all, she never found her people. Let's finish up this chapter while we still have some light. We can figure out the details for the search later. She opens the book, tucking the leaf bookmark between the last page and the back cover, still intact despite the torn, missing front cover. She starts up where they left off, at the very beginning. Makk follows along, mind listening as Takver mind reads the words on the pages. The author is describing a wall that is made out of stones that were mortared together. What's mortared? Makk interrupts. It's an old technique that people used to build with before the end of the old world. It's kind of like the muddy clay that some people use to seal their dwellings with. Takver continues. The wall from the book that she's describing is not anything unscalable. Rather, it's such a low wall that kids are known to climb on it and play, although they know they shouldn't. Hold on, Makk interrupts again. What's the point of having a wall if a child can easily climb over it? Just let the story tell itself. Takver shoots Makk a playful glare and then smirks. You'll find out, I promise. As the story opens on a physical wall that does little to deter people from literally crossing over it, the protagonist, Shevik, faces the difficulty of unbuilding walls. Thus, the stories unfold as he endeavors to traverse a more metaphorical wall that most of his xenophobic people figuratively struggle against. Some even literally try to stop him. In the very first pages, the author introduces a paradox. An anarchistic people, the Anaresti, named after the planet Anaris, which they inhabit, who don't know coercive force at a systemic societal level. They have no prisons, no police force, no cages, but some of who, at the same time, enact the ultimate form of coercive force, death, as a mob of Anaresti throws rocks and kills one of their own while trying to stop Shevik from boarding the cargo ship set to return to the neighboring planet Eurus. The literal wall represents the metaphorical wall that Shevik is trying to unbuild. Although Ursula Kroeber Le Guin wrote the book in the late mid-20th century, almost 200 years before the Great Dying, people are still building walls. Of course, the people in her book are fictional, but the challenges that they face are very realistic and relatable, even roughly 4 centuries later on a non-fictional Earth. And there are still walls. Makk's people had walls. Little help those walls ended up being. Given enough time, no wall is impenetrable against water. The marauders were like water. Takver continues. As she reads, the words describe the different preparations that Shevik was making as he prepared to leave his world to unbuild the aforementioned walls. He'd just seen off his partner Takver and their children. Makk almost intuitively grabs the finger that Takver is using to run along the bottom of the words as she silently reads aloud. Takver? Makk's sudden cognitive dissonance turns into pleasant surprise. That's you! Their grin stretches from their left ear to their right one. It's special that something so old and so rare as a physical book can have familiar components like a simple name. Takver mind giggles. The mother loved this book so much that she named me after her favorite character. I really like the name too. It sounds good in my head. This is not surprising to Makk. Some of the names that the Atmaneti give themselves come from the characters in the stories that they have been told throughout the centuries. Dolores, Hack, Telly, Aura, Scrip, and Boots, just to name a few. Although Takver and Makk share a lot of the same contemporary practices, mind speaking, foraging, water collection, mostly nocturnal activity, the people of Takver's community didn't consider themselves Atmaneti. Therefore, the stories of Dolores the Martyr and those of the last ones that were passed down from previous generations in Makk's community weren't popularized in Takver's community and vice versa. So Takver was a new name for Makk. In fact, the first time they'd heard it was when they first met beside the old river, not too long before now. Takver's people weren't Atmaneti, because they weren't Nop nomads like the Atmaneti, changing settlements every completed year. Instead, they lived for generations in a federated village called a Falush that traded with other villages on the west side of Duna, as they called the old river. On the other hand, Makk's people had always established their temporary encampments to the east of the old river ever since the Fried Treaty, over 20 reawakenings before. In fact, the Fried established boundaries that could be and were only ever crossed if there was an immediate need to see old Tatos, a shaman of sorts, among other titles, who chose to live as an isolated hermit to the east of Duna. Of course, many thought the Tatos to be a witch. But what is a witch but someone who uses uncustomary means of getting what they needs? Takver was a witch then, sneaking around by herself, living alone in a bunker beneath the ruins of a house from the old times, before the end of the old world. Makk's people had called it the Great Dying. Both Makk and Takver grew up hearing stories about the forest shaman, old Tatos, could steal your thoughts. 8 wandering little children, had 13 fingers, and on and on. The truth is that not many people knew much about old Tatos, except that they could perform miracles during a breached birth or put the life back in a babe who didn't come out kicking and crying. Legend has it that old Tatos brought egg bloods who had died in childbirth back to life more than once. Takver and Makk gather their things to go back into the bunker. They have means of seeing in the dark and prefer only to use candles inside during the day. The simple glow from a candle at night could attract the attention of a wandering marauder. Takver managed to go unnoticed by avoiding unwanted attention to herself following that principle. So they decide to go inside and continue their reading. Scorching hours are here, and it's time they go inside anyway and prepare supper before bed. Takver arranges the kindling just like the mother taught her, alternating the direction that the parallel sticks face as she stacks them. Dry leaves and twigs help ignite the kindling, which then sets fire to the larger logs. Makk hands Takver just one log. Do you need more than this, Tak? It's not safe to use the wood stove during the day. Smoke can be seen from a long ways away for both the watchful and the unexpecting eye. They wouldn't use it for long anyway, just enough to boil some water for tea and porridge. The warmth of the fire will also heat up the bunker just enough to take the chill off. The scorching knop will do the rest once they are in a deep slumber. Makk sits down on their makeshift sleeping pallet and goes through their knapsack, looking for the satchel of dandelion root that they had left over from the water-fetching journey. They dig through the interior pockets, pulling out other satchels of herbs, spices, and the like. So, did your eggblood ever tell you how she lost me? I mean, she must have lost me. I ended up in a completely different community. Makk had been wanting to ask this question for some time, but the string of events that led them to this new life in the bunker took priority. She always said that you were switched at birth. She swore that Do you know about old Tatos? Do your people talk about her? Takver swings around from facing the stove to look Makk directly in the face, holding the jug of water. Oh, do we ever? But they are not a she in our stories. They are many. And whenever we're being naughty, stop it, or else I'm going to throw you to old Tatos. Typical threat. We grew up terrified of them. Makk smiles at the memory. Well, the story goes, it was an unusually rainy hiding. Makk's biological eggblood, Shavik, yes, the same name as the protagonist from the book. Fitting since she was an advocate for unbuilding walls as well. She lay in the infirmary with a fever, her long dark hair matted around her face with sweat. With every sharp contraction, her screams echoed across the compound despite her weakened state. The Faluorvosh, a woman from a neighboring compound and the only village doctor nearby, stood over her, holding a bundle of smoking herbs. She'll have to go see the shaman. She looked at Shavik's sisters, the closest kin Shavik had, and with whom she shared living quarters in the compound. There's nothing more I can do. They would have to cross the river, but if they could get some help carrying her, they could get Shavik to old Tatos within an hour. The two sisters recruited the help of a distant cousin and their eldest child. Between the 4 of them, they carried Shavik. The sperm blood, Shavik's partner of many years, had been one of the latest victims of the disease that was killing off people in the village. Her closest family was small, but that didn't mean she was alone. Her people helped each other out despite biological ties. The village took care of the village. It had always been that way for hundreds of reawakenings. On the other side of the river, and unknown to Takver and Makk, even to this day, the same disease was ravishing another community. And it just so happened that another pregnancy was in peril. Makk's egg blood, Malna, was being taken to Old Tatos. His doula lay sick with half of the other Atmaneti. It was a dark time for their people. So much sickness and death, an awful time to give birth, let alone to twins. No one skilled in the ways of birthing was well enough when he suddenly began to experience excruciating cramps in his pelvic region. They were so bad that he felt like he was going to tear apart and everything inside was going to come gushing out. He'd never experienced such agony. As he stumbled across the refectory in panic and in so much pain, the blood staining the front of his frock alerted his fellow scavengers that something was terribly wrong. Minutes later, he was put into a pushcart and was on his way to Old Tatos. Luckily for him and the babies, their camp was only a short distance from the old recluse's shanty, less than an hour's foot. The mother said she didn't remember it, but when the two groups converged on the gated shanty at the exact same time, Old Tatos was there at the gate, as if expecting them. The shanty was small and felt even smaller with all the hostility and panic in the air. The Atmaneti group at first refused to go anywhere near the Westsiders, despite being familiar with the conditions of the treaty, but in the end, the urgency of the moment took priority over the deeply rooted xenophobia. Moments later, the cries from the two sets of not quite identical twins could be heard all the way to the river. That's how I knew you were my sibling, Makk. I look nothing like Palat, but you and I are so alike. With all the chaos and Old Tatos tending to both birthers simultaneously, something must have happened and Makk and Palat were switched. Makk and Gomba ended up with Malna. Palat and Takver were kept with the sisters while Old Tatos treated the mother, who spent several days at the shanty and eventually recovered. Dolores and Tayuti stayed with Malna all the while in a temporary shelter that they constructed nearby the shanty so that the shaman could tend to him without the three of them having to share space with the Westsiders. Of course, Palat should have gone with Malna and Makk with Shevek, but alas, that was not their fate. Since we were young, the mother suspected something had gone wrong that day. You see, she was never able to merge with Palat, nor was I. I could never share with Gombi either. For so long, I thought I was broken. Tears flowed down Makk's puffy cheeks. I thought there was something wrong with me my whole life. I was so lonely. Well, the mother knew from very early on that something was wrong. She felt a connection with me, that familiar, invisible tugging thread, but not with Palat. She knew her baby had been taken away from her. She always talked about you, her little Badap. She named me? Why didn't she ever come for me? Makk feels something like betrayal begin welling up inside them. She did, but your stubborn people refused her, more than once. She eventually had to give up. At least, that's how the stories go. Now Takver is embracing Makk, their tears creating a puddle on the shoulder of her frock. She always kept you in our memories. My three babies, she would say. Takver, Palat, and dear, sweet, lost Badap. And Palat was taken with the rest of your people? Silence. Takver's eyes well up. No. A few moments pass. It feels like an eternity to Makk, who is gobbling this all up. I found him. Now she is sobbing. Makk embraces her, holding her tightly and rubbing her back gently. Her tears drench the collar of their frock. After a few moments, those scorching scorchers killed him, burned him. I hate them. Makk lets go of Takver for a moment, reaching for their knapsack. There are some pieces of nettlecloth in there somewhere. They wants to give Takver a soft fabric to dry her tears with. Fumbling through the bag, they reaches into a deep pocket and brushes up against something hard. The ring is wrapped in the nettle cloth. They slowly pulls it out of the knapsack. Suddenly, something across the bunker begins thumping and banging against the pallet where Takver sleeps. Takver and Makk start and are quickly on their feet. Takver instinctively puts herself in front of Makk in a protective stance. "What in the scorching earth?" Makk blurts out aloud. The shaking continues. Takver creeps over to the pallet bed hesitantly and grabs a hold of the blanket that is covering the jumping box. She pulls it back, revealing the tarto box. "Tak, what the dry earth is going..." Now she's holding the yellow box. It shakes in her hands and she just stands there, mouth dropped, staring at her sibling in confusion and disbelief. Her eyes dart from Makk to the box and back. The box had never moved before, until now. Thanks for listening to another episode of Fenn Thornbot Reads. If you want a notification for the next episode, don't forget to hit subscribe. If you liked what you listened to today, hit the like button. And if you think somebody else might like it, hit the share button. Thanks again, and we'll catch you next time.